I made a huge mistake. You ever have that feeling, like you know deep down things are about to spiral, but you just keep ignoring it, thinking you can somehow handle whatever comes next? That's how it all started for me. Out of the blue, I got a call from my cousin Sarah. We weren't exactly close growing up. Honestly, we barely got along most of the time. But hey, family's family, right? And when she called, sounding like she was at the end of her rope, telling me she'd lost her job and had nowhere else to go, I couldn't just turn my back on her. So, I did what anyone who actually gives a damn would do. I offered her a place to stay. I figured it would be short-term, just long enough for her to get back on her feet, and then she'd be out of our hair. But Olivia didn't see it that way. As soon as I brought it up, she flipped. "You think it's a good idea to bring her into our home?" she asked, arms crossed, glaring at me like I just signed us up for a lifetime of misery. I get where she was coming from, though. She never liked Sarah. Thought she was a mess, the kind of person who'd just take advantage of us as long as we let her. "It's just for a little while," I said, trying to calm her down. But honestly, calming Olivia down is like trying to tame a wild animal. She just got louder. "She's going to ruin everything. You know how she is." But I stood my ground. Family sticks together, right? I couldn't just leave her out on the street. After a lot of shouting and slamming doors, Olivia stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. A few days later, Sarah showed up with a couple of suitcases and that same tired look she always had. I won't lie, it felt good to help her out. She had nowhere else to turn, and despite everything, she was family. The first few days went smoothly. Sarah mostly kept to herself, helped around the house, and didn't stir up any trouble. She even pitched in with the chores, cooking, cleaning, things I wasn't expecting. But then Olivia started acting off. First, it was just little things. She'd come home from work, see me and Sarah laughing in the kitchen, and get all defensive. "Must be nice to just hang out all day while the rest of us have to work," she'd mutter, all bitter. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she just needed time to adjust, but the comments kept coming, and they started getting worse. It didn't help that Sarah was trying so damn hard to make herself useful around the house. It was like she was trying to prove something, make up for crashing on our couch. But that seemed to drive Olivia up the wall. Every time I said something nice about Sarah, like complimenting her for cooking or folding the laundry, Olivia would twist it. "Wow, looks like you got yourself a new housewife," she'd say, voice dripping with sarcasm. And when I tried to defend Sarah, it only made things worse. We started fighting more, loud, ugly arguments that probably had the neighbors wondering what the hell was going on. Olivia accused me of all sorts of things. That I was playing house with Sarah, that I was getting too close to her. And Sarah? She'd sit quietly in the other room, probably listening to every word, then act like nothing happened the next day. The tension between us? It was thick. It was like a fog that never lifted. I'd come home from work, and I could feel it the second I walked through the door. Olivia would be sitting there, glaring at me, waiting for me to slip up. Meanwhile, Sarah would be acting all sweet, offering to leave to make things easier. But I couldn't bring myself to kick her out. It didn't feel right, even though I knew it wasn't helping anything. Pretty soon, that jealousy morphed into full-blown paranoia. Olivia couldn't handle anything anymore. If I spent too much time with Sarah, she'd lose it. One night after dinner, Olivia snapped. She threw her plate down so hard that the glass shattered. "I bet you wish she was your wife, don't you?" she screamed, then stormed out, leaving me standing there stunned. I glanced at Sarah, who was just sitting there, silent, staring back at me. I didn't know what to say. I was torn. Part of me wanted to comfort Olivia, but part of me didn't want to drag Sarah into this mess. And then, there was this nagging feeling that maybe Olivia was just overreacting, that her jealousy was clouding her judgment. That's when I started noticing other changes in Olivia's behavior. She was coming home later and later from work, always claiming she had to stay late. But something didn't add up. Sometimes, she'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. Other times, she'd walk in, see me sitting with Sarah, and roll her eyes like she couldn't stand the sight of me. "Olivia, we need to talk," I said one night, hoping to get her to open up, to tell me what was really going on. but she just brushed me off.
I'm tired, David.
Can we not do this right now? That was it. She shut me out completely, and I was left wondering, what happened to the woman I thought I knew? I started questioning everything. Was bringing Sarah in a mistake? Was I missing something obvious? I thought I was just doing the right thing, helping out family. But now, everything felt out of control. And Olivia, the woman I trusted the most, the one I thought I knew, was turning into someone I barely recognized. I didn't recognize the woman I was married to anymore. Every day, it felt like she resented me a little more. And that's how everything started to unravel. At first, it was just small changes, little things that didn't seem like much, but over time, they piled up. Olivia started coming home later and later, always with some excuse about a big project or staying late to help her boss. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But when she walked through the door, her moods were all over the place. Some nights, she'd barely say a word, tense as a wire. Other nights, she'd be way too cheerful, like she was trying to convince herself, or me, that everything was fine. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at my cold dinner, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Every time I asked her about it, she'd shut me down. I'm just tired, David, she'd say, brushing me off like it was nothing, and that would be the end of it. I'd go to bed with more questions than answers, wondering why it felt like I was losing my wife to something, or someone I couldn't even see. Things really started to change one night when I decided to take a different route home from work. I cut through downtown to avoid the usual traffic, and that's when I saw them, Olivia and some guy standing outside a fancy restaurant. I recognized him instantly, Ethan, the colleague she'd mentioned a few times. But they weren't just standing there. They were laughing, leaning into each other like they shared some private joke. I saw her touch his arm, and suddenly, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I pulled over a block away, trying to calm myself, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I sat there, frozen, staring at them through the rearview mirror, my stomach in knots. It wasn't like they were kissing or doing anything that would make people think something was definitely going on. But the way they were acting, the way she was touching him, felt like something I shouldn't be seeing. I wanted to get out of the car, confront them, but I stayed frozen, second-guessing myself. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe they were just colleagues. Maybe they were just having a laugh. But deep down, I knew better. When Olivia came home that night, I asked her about it casually, trying to keep my tone light. So, how's Ethan? I said, just testing the waters. She looked at me with that fake innocent look, the one she's perfected over the years. What do you mean? She asked, her voice flat and dismissive. I pressed a little harder. I saw you two together, I said, more forcefully than I intended. And that's when it happened. Her act slipped. Her defensiveness flared up. Oh, for God's sake, David, she snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. We were just having a bite to eat after work. He's just a friend. Don't make it into something it's not. But I knew her too well. I knew when she was being honest and when she was lying through her teeth. And that night, she was lying. Her eyes kept darting away from mine, like she couldn't even look me in the face. Her words stumbled, like she was scrambling for a story that might hold up. And I could feel it. The pit in my stomach told me she was hiding something. It made my blood boil. The thought of her treating me like I was blind to what was happening right in front of me. But I didn't push her any further that night. Part of me didn't want to hear more lies. I just nodded and let it go. But that didn't make it go away. It gnawed at me all night, eating at me, and I couldn't shake it. I needed someone to talk to, so I turned to Sarah. She was the only one who really knew what was going on inside that house, the only one who might understand. Later that evening, after Olivia had stormed off to bed, I grabbed Sarah and pulled her aside. Can I talk to you about something? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah gave me a knowing look, like she'd been waiting for me to open up. What's going on? She asked softly, concern in her eyes. I laid it all out for her. The late nights, the weird moods, the sight of Olivia with Ethan. Sarah didn't interrupt. She just listened, taking it all in without judgment. When I finished, she shook her head. more angry than surprised. "Something's definitely off," she said, her voice sharp. "Who acts like that with another guy when they're married?" Her disbelief was palpable. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "David, you need to keep an eye on her. If she's hiding something, you deserve to know." Having Sarah on my side felt like a weight had been lifted. At least someone else validated what I had been feeling. I agreed with her, and from that moment on, I started watching everything. Every time Olivia's phone buzzed, every time she left the room to take a call, my heart would skip a beat. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was with him, wondering what parts of her life she was keeping from me. It was driving me crazy. I started paying attention to every little detail, the time she left, when she came back, what she said. I made mental notes of everything, trying to connect the dots, waiting for her to slip up, waiting for something that would prove my suspicions. But soon, the paranoia started to take over. One night, Olivia was supposed to be working late again. Sarah was in the living room, reading a book, but she noticed me pacing back and forth like a caged animal. After a while, she looked up and said, "Why don't you just check her phone?" At first, I hesitated, but Sarah's suggestion lingered in my mind. If she's not hiding anything, there won't be anything to find. I didn't need much convincing. The phone was sitting there innocently on the kitchen counter, just waiting. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and unlocked it. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her just by looking at it. But I had to know. I couldn't keep living in this endless limbo of doubt. I scrolled through the messages, trying to keep my cool, trying not to let my mind spiral. Most of the texts were just ordinary stuff, work updates, small talk. But then I saw it. Ethan's name popped up like a red flag, and my fingers froze. I opened the conversation. The most recent message was short but loaded. "Let's meet up. Same place as last time." And that's when everything changed. The world seemed to tilt, like the floor had suddenly dropped out from under me. My grip on the phone tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. All those suspicions, all the gut feelings I'd been suppressing, they came crashing down in that one moment. I didn't want to believe it, but the proof was right there in black and white. I put the phone down slowly, my mind reeling. I glanced at Sarah, who had been watching me closely, waiting for something. "Well?" she asked, sitting up a little, her eyes steady. I told her what I'd found, and she shook her head in disgust. "She's a piece of work, David," Sarah said coldly, her words cutting through the silence. "You deserve so much better than this." And she was right. But now I was stuck. What the hell was I supposed to do? It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark, bottomless hole, knowing that whatever decision I made next would change everything. After seeing that message, I was completely lost. I didn't know what to do anymore. I turned to Sarah. She was in the kitchen, casually making coffee, like it was just another night. But when I walked in, I must have looked like a ghost, because she instantly set the mug down and rushed over to me. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady, though her eyes held that sharp intensity one had come to expect from her. I handed her the phone and pointed to Ethan's message. She read it, her lips tightening as her eyes narrowed, taking in the weight of what she was seeing. "You get it now?" I asked, my voice trembling, caught between disbelief and anger. "She's meeting him tonight." Sarah looked up at me, her gaze like fire, sharp and focused. "You know what you need to do," she said calmly, but her tone was firm, as if she'd been waiting for me to finally snap. "You need to confront her. Don't keep waiting around for her to admit it. She won't. Trust me." I felt like I was stuck in some bad TV drama, like this wasn't real life. But at that point, I didn't care about what seemed logical or sane. I was desperate for answers. "What do we do?" I asked, a mix of dread and determination weighing me down. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We go to the bar," she said, her voice blunt. "We'll be there watching. She's expecting to meet him tonight, right? Well, we'll be right there." The idea of watching my wife with another man made my stomach twist. The thought of seeing her laugh with him, to be so comfortable and at ease with him, It made my insides churn. But another part of me needed to see it. I needed that undeniable proof, the kind that would tear me apart but finally give me the truth. When Olivia came home to get ready for her girls' night, I did my best to act like everything was normal. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, though my mind was elsewhere. She breezed in, overly cheerful, like nothing had changed, and went straight to the bathroom to shower and change. I could hear the water running, each drop echoing in my mind like a countdown to something I wasn't ready for. When she finally came out, looking all put together in a tight dress and heels that were way too high for someone who wasn't trying to impress, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "Going somewhere special?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice, but I knew I wasn't fooling her. She flashed that smile at me, the one that used to melt me, but now it just made me sick. "Just out with the girls," she said, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up." As soon as the door slammed behind her, I was on my feet. Sarah and I got ready to move. We headed straight for the bar, the trendy place Ethan's message had mentioned. A spot Olivia never visited with me. I couldn't help but wonder, how many times had she been there with him? We parked a block away, sitting in silence, both of our hearts racing in sync. Sarah leaned in and whispered, "Ready for this?" "No," I muttered, though I knew there was no turning back now. I admitted, but deep down, I knew there was no going back. We walked into the bar, and it didn't take long to find them. There they were, sitting in a booth in the back so close it was hard to believe. They were laughing, really laughing, like they were in their own little bubble. Olivia's whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, and Ethan, he was leaning in, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle, like they were sharing some private joke. I wanted to march over there, flip the table, and drag him outside by his collar, but Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Don't," she whispered. "Just watch." And so that's what we did. We found a spot at the bar, out of sight but close enough to see everything. The longer I watched, the more my heart cracked. Olivia looked so carefree, so happy, like she didn't have a care in the world. Did she even think about me? Did she feel any guilt? Probably not. We watched them order drinks, cocktails she never chose when we were together. They clinked their glasses, toasting to something I couldn't hear. Then Olivia leaned in and gave him that smile, the one that used to be mine. Ethan's hand slipped over hers, his fingers tracing her knuckles like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't pull away. That felt like a knife to the gut. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened, and I could feel her anger radiating off of her like a force field. "She doesn't deserve you, David," she hissed, her voice thick with contempt. "Look at her. Look at how easily she lies to you." Part of me wanted to stand up right then, walk over, and confront them both. I wanted to make a scene, scream at Olivia, ask her how she could do this to me, how she could betray me like this. But another part of me, the part still clinging to some shred of dignity, held me back. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. I didn't want her to think she'd won. So I sat there, silently watching her flirt with another man, my marriage slipping away in real time. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Eventually, Ethan stood up and took Olivia's hand. They walked toward the door, and with every step, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. "Come on," Sarah said, pulling on her jacket. "Let's go before they see us." We left the bar and walked back to the car in silence. I felt like I was walking through a fog, numb, disconnected, as if I wasn't fully in my body anymore. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold, her expression fierce. "We make her pay," she said, her words sharp and final. And as crazy as it seemed, I believed her. I needed to believe her, because in that moment, revenge felt like the only thing that could stop me from completely falling apart. But as we drove home, the weight of what I had seen started to settle in. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was out there with another man, laughing with him, touching him, making plans with him behind my back. It wasn't some spontaneous fling. This was planned, calculated, and that hurt more than I could ever explain. By the time we got back to the house, I felt like a hollow shell of the man I used to be. I knew things were about to change, but I had no idea how or when. All I knew was that the woman who walked out that door tonight, she wasn't my wife anymore. I couldn't get the image of Olivia and Ethan out of my head. There they were, wrapped up in their own little world, while mine crumbled into dust. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. A bad dream where I was screaming but no sound came out. The difference was this wasn't a dream. It was real. And I was wide awake, facing the brutal truth of my unraveling marriage. When I walked into the house, Sarah was already in the living room. She'd gone straight to the liquor cabinet and was already pouring us both a glass of wine. "Here," she said, handing me a glass and clinking it against hers. "You look like you need this." She was right. I drained half the glass in one go, the burn of the alcohol trying to numb the ache in my chest. It didn't work, of course. Nothing would. But at least it gave me something to focus on, a distraction from the weight of everything crashing down around me. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. The silence in the house pressed down on me, suffocating, like a heavy weight I couldn't shake off. Sarah sat beside me closer than usual. For a while, we didn't speak, just drank in silence. "Talk to me, David," she said after a while, her voice soft but firm. "You can't keep all this bottled up." I opened my mouth, and suddenly the words came tumbling out, like they had been waiting to escape for weeks. I told her everything. The way Olivia's smile had looked different with Ethan, the way they touched each other, how she lit up around him in a way she hadn't done with me in months. Sarah listened intently, nodding, cursing under her breath. Her eyes were hardening more with every word I spoke. "You don't deserve this," she said, her voice venomous. "She's a liar, David. She's making a fool out of you." The anger in Sarah's voice mirrored the fire building up in my chest. I slammed the rest of my wine down, feeling the tension coil in my muscles like a tight spring ready to snap. "You give her everything, and she repays you like this?" Sarah continued, her voice trembling with fury. "God, David, I just want her to pay for this." The words stung, but they also ignited something inside me. A burning, reckless urge to do something about all this pain. I looked down at my empty glass, my fingers still gripping the stem, like I could somehow hold onto some sense of control. "Yeah, well, what am I supposed to do?" I muttered, my voice bitter and hollow. "She's out there living her secret life, and here I am, stuck, not even knowing who she is anymore." Sarah refilled my glass, her gaze unwavering, and for the first time, I noticed a cold calculation in her eyes. She leaned in, her voice low and deliberate. "You know, if Olivia is so worried about you being around me, maybe we should give her something real to worry about." I blinked, confusion washing over me. "What do you mean?" Sarah flashed a sly, almost predatory smile, one I'd never seen before, and it felt like a challenge. "Think about it, David," she said, her voice dripping with something dangerous. "She's out there having her fun with Ethan. Maybe it's time she knows what it feels like. Give her a taste of her own medicine." She took a sip of her wine without breaking eye contact, and suddenly, the air in the room felt thicker. My heart hammered in my chest, but I was frozen. The idea of doing something like that, something so twisted, had never crossed my mind. I wasn't that kind of guy, or at least I didn't think I was. "I can't do that," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not like her." "Maybe you should be," Sarah shot back, her voice fierce. "What's stopping you? She doesn't respect you. She doesn't love you. She's out there living her double life, and you're here being the good husband, suffering in silence. Screw that, David. You deserve to be happy too." I didn't know what to say. On one hand, the idea of cheating felt like a line I could never cross. But then again, hadn't Olivia already crossed it? Wasn't she out there right now with Ethan, lying to me, betraying me with every word, every touch? I looked at Sarah, and for the first time, I saw her in a different light. Not just as my cousin, but as someone who truly understood me. Someone who had seen my pain and was willing to stand by me, no matter what. The wine was starting to cloud my judgment. My head felt fuzzy, and I couldn't separate what was right from what felt good anymore. "You really think it's a good idea?" I asked, my voice quieter now, uncertain, yet a part of me. The angry part, the hurt part, was listening. Sarah leaned in closer, her perfume mingling with the wine on her breath, a heady mix that filled my senses. "I think it's the only way to take back some control," she whispered, her words like a spark to dry tinder. "She doesn't get to treat you like this and walk away scot-free." The air between us seemed to thicken with tension, and the room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me. Everything was spinning, blurring together. I wanted to say no. I wanted to be the better person, to rise above it. But as Sarah's hand brushed against mine, as her fingers intertwined with mine in that charged moment, something inside me snapped. The anger, the betrayal, the raw need for revenge. It all exploded to the surface, drowning out every other thought. Before I knew it, I was kissing her. Started slow, hesitant, unsure, like we were both testing the waters. But once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. It was messy, frantic, driven by a need to feel something, anything, other than the constant ache of betrayal I'd been carrying for weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. Alive in the way only rage and hurt could make me feel. I didn't think about Olivia. I didn't think about Ethan. I didn't think about the consequences. It was just me and Sarah. Two people trapped in a world that was falling apart, trying to escape it, trying to feel something other than the suffocating weight of what we'd become. We walked to the bedroom, urgency in every step, both of us lost in the moment. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would change everything. But in that instant, I didn't care. I wanted to forget. I wanted to lose myself in someone who didn't look at me with pity or disappointment. Sarah was right there, matching every move, whispering words of encouragement, telling me I deserved this, that I deserved to feel wanted, to feel something other than the hollow, aching emptiness that had been my constant companion. Afterward, we sat in silence. The weight of the situation pressed down on us, both of us processing what had just happened. For a brief moment, that silence felt comforting, like a quiet that existed before the storm. But then reality came crashing back, and I couldn't help but wonder, what the hell have we just done? The next morning was a blur. I woke up to the sound of the front door opening, and panic hit me like a freight train. Olivia was home. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding, and that's when I noticed Sarah still half asleep beside me. I froze. It was too late. The door swung open, and there she was, Olivia, standing in the doorway, eyes wide in disbelief. She took in the scene, her face twisting in anger, shock, and something else I couldn't read. "What the hell?" Olivia's voice sliced through the silence like a blade, and my stomach dropped into my feet. She stormed into the room, her face contorted with rage. "Are you serious, David? In our bed?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to defend myself. What was there to explain? She had made her choices, and now I had made mine. Olivia wasn't about to see it that way. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, her voice trembling with fury. "After everything I've done for you, after all these years, and this is how you repay me?" Sarah, who had just gotten out of bed and wrapped the sheets around herself, tried to calm the situation. "Maybe you should think about your own choices before you start blaming others," she said, her voice firm but measured, like she was the only one holding on to any sense of control. But Olivia wasn't hearing any of it. "You're both disgusting," she spat, her tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the tears of regret I had expected. No, these were tears of pure indignation. She couldn't seem to fathom how anyone could betray her, the queen of hypocrisy. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry for what had happened because, as I stood there looking at the woman who had torn apart our marriage, who had made me question my own worth, I realized that this was it. There was no going back. Nothing would ever be the same, and maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Olivia's face turned a furious shade of red, her eyes wild as she screamed again. How could you do this to me, David? To us? She stood there, trembling with rage, fists clenched so tight I thought she might hurt someone. Maybe me, maybe Sarah, maybe herself. Her words came out like poison, bitter, venomous, and full of rage. She launched into a tirade, ranting about betrayal, acting like the victim, as if she hadn't been sneaking around with Ethan for God knows how long. "Do you know what you've done?" she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've ruined everything, my life, our marriage." She turned to Sarah, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're a snake, both of you. God, I can't believe this." I felt my anger surge, a hot wave of heat flooding my body. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done listening to her twisted version of events, done pretending I was the one at fault. "You want to talk about betrayal, Olivia?" I said, my voice rising to match hers, each word like a punch to the gut. "Don't you dare act like the victim. Don't forget that I know about Ethan." The room fell dead silent. Her mouth opened and closed, her eyes frantically darting around, searching for a way out. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, panic flashing across her face. "Cut the crap, Olivia." I shot back, stepping closer. "I saw the messages. I saw you two at the bar. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what's been going on behind my back?" She froze, her whole body tensing like she was bracing for impact. Then, true to form, she tried to manipulate the situation. She tried to twist the truth until it didn't look so ugly. "It wasn't what you think," she said, her voice suddenly softer, like that change in tone could somehow change the facts. He's just a friend. I never meant for it to go this far, David. I was lonely. You were so wrapped up in your own world. And I needed someone to talk to." She looked up at me, searching for sympathy in my eyes, but there was none. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, she still found a way to make herself the victim, as if her choices were somehow my fault. I laughed. A bitter, ugly laugh that escaped without warning. "You know what? I'm done," I said, my voice steady but final. "I can't do this anymore, Olivia. I won't. I'm filing for divorce. You and Ethan can have each other for all I care." Her face twisted with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You're throwing all this away because of one mistake," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're breaking up our marriage over one stupid thing?" "It wasn't a mistake, Olivia," I said, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders as I spoke. "It was a choice, and you made it, over and over again." Olivia had no rebuttal. She just stood there, shaking with rage, her chest heaving as she glared at me and then at Sarah. With one last furious glance, she stormed out of the room. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, the sound of doors slamming and things being thrown echoing through the house. Sarah didn't say much after that. I think we both knew we'd crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed, and that things between us would never be the same. A few days later, Sarah packed up her things. "I think it's for the best," she said, and I couldn't argue with that. There was too much history, too much damage. We tried to stay friendly after she left, but it was always awkward, like we were walking on eggshells, avoiding the inevitable. As for Olivia, she was gone. A week later, she left a note saying she was staying with a friend until things blew over, but I knew the truth. She didn't want to face what she had done. The divorce was ugly, as they always are. She fought me on everything, the house, the money, the furniture. At one point, she even tried to guilt-trip me, telling me that we could still work things out, that I was being vindictive for wanting to end it. But I held my ground. It was over, and nothing she said would change that. When everything was final, and the paperwork was signed, I stood in the middle of what used to be our home, feeling a strange mix of freedom and emptiness. Everything had changed. I had no idea what came next, but I knew one thing. I was going to rebuild, piece by piece. The weeks that followed were a blur. I started picking up old hobbies I had abandoned. Fishing, hiking, even learning to cook a halfway decent meal for myself. It felt odd at first, trying to fill the empty spaces where Olivia had once been, but eventually, it got easier. I started reconnecting with old friends, the ones who had faded into the background while my marriage was falling apart. Sarah and I kept in touch, but there was no talk of rekindling what had happened between us. We both knew it was a mistake, a desperate act in the midst of chaos. While there was a part of me that still felt connected to her, we kept things strictly platonic. There were moments, though, late at night, when I'd lie in bed, replaying everything, wondering if I'd made the right choices, wondering if maybe I'd lost more than I'd gained. But eventually, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about letting yourself move on. So I forgave Olivia, as much as anyone could forgive someone who had shattered their heart. But more importantly, I forgave myself for the mistakes I made in my anger, for the things I'd done out of desperation. Life started making sense again in a new way. I found a new normal, new routines. Eventually, I started dating again. Nothing serious at first, just casual dinners, awkward coffee dates. But then one day, I met someone who didn't make me feel like I had to try so hard. Someone who saw me for who I really was and didn't expect me to be anything else. As we spent more time together, I realized that love isn't about finding someone who makes you whole. It's about finding someone who makes you better. Someone who pushes you to be honest and open. Someone who trusts you and who you can trust in return. It took losing Olivia to learn that lesson, but I came out of it stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the simple things, like waking up next to someone who actually wants to be there. Looking back, I don't have any regrets. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it all led me here. And maybe that's what life is all about. Learning, letting go, and finding new ways to love and be loved, even after everything falls apart.